In 49 BC, Julius Caesar did something that would forever change the nature of imperial power. He crossed the Rubicon not just geographically, but morally. At that moment, he was not just violating a Roman law. He was setting the first precedent for how empires destroy themselves by betraying their own founding principles. Caesar knew exactly what he was doing. The Roman Republic had been built on 5 unbreakable pillars: fiscal discipline, monetary honesty, productive economy, elites connected to the people, and civic virtue above personal profit. These were not just romantic ideals. They were civilizational survival technologies tested for 500 years. But Caesar discovered something that all future emperors would learn. It is easier to break the rules than to face the consequences of following them. Financing his military campaigns while respecting the republican budget? Impossible. Maintaining the purity of coins while paying legions? Impractical. Preserving civic virtue while buying votes in the Senate? Naive. What makes this even more fascinating is that Caesar was not improvising. He was following a manual he himself was writing, the first blueprint of how empires self-destruct by systematically abandoning the principles that created them. Rome was not a victim of barbarians or natural catastrophes. It was a victim of a lethal discovery, that in the short term, betraying its own principles is always more profitable and politically advantageous than upholding them. Caesar proved that you can break all the rules and still be hailed as a hero. The problem is that he also proved that this betrayal is contagious. Once a leader demonstrates that the rules are optional, all subsequent leaders face the same choice: follow principles and appear naive, or betray them and appear pragmatic. If this revelation about how Caesar created the first manual of imperial self-sabotage surprised you as much as it surprised me when I connected these dots, leave a like. I want to know how many people are seeing for the first time how empires destroy themselves from the inside out. The first rule Rome established and then betrayed was the most basic of all: never spend more than you earn. During the Republic, this was not just a fiscal directive, it was a matter of survival. No deficits, no external debts, no possibility of financing military adventures that the people could not afford. The exact moment of betrayal can be dated 58 BC, when Caesar assumed the consulship and discovered that conquering Gaul would cost 3 times more than Rome collected annually. The Republican solution would have been simple: do not conquer Gaul. The imperial solution was revolutionary: invent the deficit as a tool of power. Caesar not only spent money Rome did not have, he created the first intellectual justification for imperial deficits. Investment in expansion, he called it. Growth through conquest. Temporary deficits for permanent gains. Every phrase he used to justify excessive spending would be repeated by all subsequent emperors. The parallel with modern United States is mathematically precise. In 1971, when Nixon abandoned the gold standard, he was repeating exactly the same logic as Caesar. Old fiscal rules are incompatible with modern imperial ambitions. Since then, American deficits have followed the same trajectory as Roman deficits. Always growing, always justified as strategic investments. But Caesar had discovered something even deeper about the nature of imperial deficits. They are not just economic tools, they are tools of political control. Deficits allow emperors to buy loyalty without immediately raising taxes. They allow financing wars without popular consensus. They allow promising benefits without explaining costs. The result was predictable. In 100 years, Rome went from republican surpluses to deficits that consumed 40% of imperial revenue just in interest payments. The empire had become addicted to its own fiscal betrayal, unable to return to discipline without politically collapsing. The second rule Rome betrayed was keep money honest. For centuries, the Roman aureus had been the global standard of trust: 7.3 grams of pure gold, weight and purity guaranteed by the Republic. Accepting an aureus was like accepting a mathematical contract. You knew exactly what you were getting. Emperor Nero changed this forever in 64 AD. Facing massive costs to rebuild Rome after the Great Fire, he made a decision that seemed brilliant at the time. He reduced the weight of the aureus from 7.3 to 7.2 grams. A difference of only 1.4%. Who would notice? Everyone noticed. Merchants began weighing coins. Money changers offered different rates for old versus new aurei. The market had detected the betrayal within weeks. But Nero had discovered something that all subsequent emperors would learn. Once you break monetary trust, each subsequent crisis makes it easier to break it again. Caracalla reduced the weight to 6.5 grams. Diocletian to 5.5 grams. In the 4th century, the aureus contained only 4.5 grams of gold. Rome had transformed its currency from a mathematical contract into a political promise, and political promises are always optional. Share this with anyone who needs to understand how monetary devaluation is not a modern phenomenon, but the second step in the manual of imperial self-sabotage, because this story is repeating itself exactly now. The parallel with the modern dollar is strikingly precise. In 1933, Roosevelt reduced the gold content of the dollar from 35 per ounce, a 41% devaluation. In 1971, Nixon completely eliminated gold convertibility. Since then, the dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power, following exactly the same trajectory as the Roman aureus. But the true lesson is not in the devaluation, it is in the justification. Nero claimed imperial necessity. Roosevelt claimed national emergency. Nixon claimed monetary flexibility. Each emperor discovered that breaking monetary honesty is always justifiable when you control the narrative. The result was that Rome created the first precedent for how imperial currencies become instruments of disguised confiscation. Each reduction in gold content was an invisible tax on those who held money. Each devaluation transferred wealth from ordinary citizens to the imperial treasury. The third rule betrayed was invest in production, not speculation. The Roman Republic had been built on a solid foundation: agriculture, manufacturing, trade in real goods. Wealth came from creating value, not from manipulating prices. Emperor Vespasian changed this in 69 AD when he discovered that it was more profitable to tax financial transactions than real production. He created the first tax on monetary speculation, not to discourage it, but to profit from it. Rome had officially discovered that financialization generates more revenue than the real economy. The result was a complete transformation of the imperial economy. Roman patricians stopped investing in farms and workshops, preferring to speculate with loans, exchange rates, and grain futures contracts. The productive class was gradually replaced by a rentier class that lived by manipulating money, not by creating value. Diocletian took this to an extreme in 301 AD with his famous edict on prices, the first attempt to control a completely financialized economy through regulation. The result was predictable. Black markets flourished, real production collapsed, and speculation became even more profitable because it was now also illegal. The parallel with modern financialization is mathematically identical. In 1950, the American financial sector represented 3% of GDP. Today, it represents 21%. Wall Street generates more profits than the entire American manufacturing industry combined. Exactly like Rome, the United States discovered that it is easier to profit by manipulating money than by creating real value. But the true betrayal was not in financialization. It was in the change of incentives. When speculation becomes more profitable than production, the entire society reorients its talents. The best Roman minds stopped studying engineering and agriculture to study finance and tax law. Exactly like today, when the best Harvard graduates go to hedge funds, not to research laboratories. The fourth rule betrayed was keep elites connected to the people. During the Republic, public offices were considered temporary services. You served Rome, you did not serve yourself from Rome. Corruption existed, but it was an exception, not the rule. Emperor Hadrian broke this in 117 AD when he allowed senators to live permanently in their provinces, creating the first class of truly global elites. They maintained Roman citizenship, but lived in Egypt, Gaul, Syria. They paid Roman taxes, but their children grew up speaking Greek or Gaulish. Subscribe here because I will continue decoding these patterns of divorce between elites and the population. And the next one will be about how to recognize when your own national elites are following exactly the same Roman script. The result was a fundamental transformation in the nature of imperial power. Roman elites stopped seeing themselves as Romans who governed an empire and began to see themselves as imperial who happened to have Roman passports. Their loyalties, investments, and families became transnational. Marcus Aurelius formalized this in 161 AD by creating the first system of global citizenship for elites. They could maintain properties, businesses, and residences in any province, paying taxes only where it was most convenient. Rome had created the first truly stateless class in history. The parallel with modern global elites is frighteningly precise. American billionaires maintain residences in multiple countries, companies registered in tax havens, and children educated in international schools. They are nominally American, but their lives, investments, and loyalties are genuinely global. But the true betrayal was not in mobility. It was in the loss of shared interest. When Roman elites could escape the consequences of their decisions by moving provinces, they stopped worrying about long-term sustainability. Why preserve the Italian economy if you can invest in the Egyptian economy? The result was that Rome created the first precedent for how imperial elites become parasites of their own empires. They extract wealth and power from the system, but invest their gains outside of it. When the system collapses, they simply migrate to the next one. The fifth and final rule betrayed was preserve civic virtue above profit. During the Republic, public offices were considered temporary services. You served Rome, you did not serve yourself from Rome. Corruption existed, but it was an exception, not the rule. Emperor Commodus destroyed this in 180 AD when he literally auctioned public offices to the highest bidder. He transformed the Roman government from a public service into a private business. Whoever paid the most governed the most. The result was the first complete bureaucratization of an empire. Offices became investments. You paid to be appointed praetor, then recovered the investment through bribes and illegal fees. The government became a wealth extraction machine operated by those who could afford to participate. Diocletian formalized this by creating the first revolving doors system in history. Former imperial officials could immediately work for companies they had regulated, provided they paid a fee to the treasury. Rome had formalized regulatory capture. The parallel with modern systemic corruption is identical. In the United States, former financial regulators routinely become executives of banks they supervised. Former politicians become lobbyists for industries they regulated. The system has become a machine for converting public power into private profit. But the true betrayal was not in individual corruption. It was in the normalization of corruption. When Rome made it official that public offices were opportunities for profit, it destroyed the very idea of public service. Honest people stopped seeking office because they could not compete with those willing to pay for them. The result was that Rome created the first precedent for how empires become kleptocracies. The government stops serving the people and starts serving those who can pay for access. Public policies become private products sold to the highest bidder. In 476 AD, when Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, he was not conquering Rome. He was formalizing a collapse that had begun 500 years earlier with Caesar. Rome did not fall due to barbarian invasion. It fell because it had systematically betrayed every principle that had made it great. The pattern is mathematically precise. Fiscal deficits lead to monetary devaluation, which leads to financialization, which leads to the divorce of elites, which leads to systemic corruption, which leads to collapse. Each betrayal makes the next one easier and more necessary. What makes our era unique is not that we are experiencing something new, but that we can see the pattern repeating in real time. The United States is currently in the fourth phase, divorce of elites. China is in the second, disguised monetary devaluation. Europe is in the third, accelerated financialization. The question is not whether these empires will betray their founding principles. They are already betraying them. The question is whether we can recognize the signs early enough to position ourselves adequately for the transition. Rome taught us that empires are not defeated by external enemies. They defeat themselves by discovering that betraying their own principles is always more profitable in the short term than upholding them. Every emperor who chose pragmatism over principles was being individually rational, but collectively they were writing the script for self-destruction. Now tell me in the comments, which current power do you think is most advanced in the process of betraying its own founding principles? The United States, China, or the European Union? And which betrayal worries you most? Fiscal, monetary, or the capture of elites? The future does not belong to those who try to preserve declining empires. but to those who recognize the patterns of self-sabotage early enough to position themselves for what comes next. Rome gave us the manual. The only question is whether we will read it before it's too late.